fossil birds.
And how do those two go hand in hand? Are you looking at birds that are obviously very old?
You know, there are some very famous, really ancient fossil birds that go back to the age of dinosaurs. Those aren't the ones that I focus my research on. I actually study fossils of modern type birds. So birds, I'm studying birds in what we call the Quaternary period of time.
How long ago does that go?
Well, it starts with the Pleistocene about 2.5 million years ago, and then comes up through the Holocene, which is about the last 10,000 years. And honestly, most of the extinctions of birds that I study have happened very recently in that period of time. So they've happened only in the time since people have been present in the world's ecosystems.
So you're looking at the extinction of birds, and how does that better help you understand bird populations today?
Well, I'm studying the history of extinction of modern birds in relation to human ecological impacts, especially on islands, but also on continents. And by studying extinctions that have happened because of ecological change caused by humans in the recent past, we may be able to better protect species going forward from further extinctions.
How interesting. So I know that there was a big anniversary. The extinction of the passenger pigeon just marked 100 years. Do you do any research on that, or is that an example of a human-influenced extinction?
This is a prime example this year, and a lot of people are thinking about bird extinctions because this is the 100-year anniversary of the extinction of the passenger pigeon. And we have the actual last individual to have lived of the passenger pigeon is a mounted specimen that belongs to the Smithsonian. She's on exhibit this year. You can see her in the lobby of the Natural History Museum.
And that's Martha.
And that's Martha. She died in the Cincinnati Zoo on September the 1st, 1914. And she was a celebrity at that time because she was the last living member of what had been the most abundant species of North American bird, if not the most abundant species of bird in the world.
The most abundant bird in the world?
Only 50 to 100 years before that.
So if that was the most abundant bird in the world, can you tell us a little bit about their life history, their natural history? What kind of birds were they?
Absolutely. And I just want to mention, too, that we have an example of a passenger pigeon here. So you can see what they looked like. And this is a male and has this beautiful rusty iridescence. And the female was duller. But these birds traveled. They were perhaps the most social species of bird ever. They traveled in enormous flocks. They migrated in incredible flocks. They roosted in big congregations, and they nested colonially in these huge nesting colonies. Their flocks could have had 1 billion or 2 billion birds in a single flock.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
As we're seeing in this recreation here, the sky must have gotten very dark when they passed by.
People who witnessed these flocks, like colonial and pioneer Americans, said that they could hear the thunder of the wings before they even saw the migrating flock. And they would fly over, it could take over a day or up to 3 days for one migrating flock to cross the sky. It was just a river of birds. And John James Audubon said it was like an eclipse of the midday sun when these birds flew over.
So it's astonishing to me that a bird that was perhaps the most abundant on Earth could go extinct in such a short period of time.
It is astonishing, and it was astonishing to Americans living at the time that this happened. They had experienced this very abundant species in their lifetimes, and then they witnessed its extinction.
I think we should ask our students what led to their extinction, maybe their vulnerabilities.
Let's find out.
All right. Here's your chance to answer a poll with us today. What made the passenger pigeon vulnerable to extinction? Was it migrating in large groups, nesting in colonies, eating acorns and other tree nuts, raising only one chick per year, or having tasty flesh? Take a moment to think about it and put your answer in the window to the right of your video screen. So Helen, the results are coming in and it looks like we have an even spread across all answers. What do you think?
That's showing that the students have very accurate opinions on this, because in fact this was sort of a trick question. Each of those answers has truth in it. And the birds indeed migrating in these large groups, nesting and roosting in these large groups in particular, made it easy to locate the birds, especially once we had the telegraph to let people know where the flocks were deciding to nest. And then professional hunters could harvest them in great numbers. And you know, back in those days, we didn't have the chicken farms established that we have now. You couldn't just walk into a grocery store and buy a chicken as easily as you can now. So people relied on wild game to quite an extent. And these birds were just piled into railway cars and brought back to the eastern cities in our country.
So they were a primary staple.
They were a very primary staple, and you can find recipes for passenger pigeons in old recipe books.
Wow, that's interesting.
You know, in addition, they raised only one, as far as we know, only one chick per year. So if you did harvest them, it could be hard for the population to recover if you harvested them very heavily. And the reason they were able to nest in such huge congregations is that they fed on nut crops. They fed on acorns, chestnuts, and beech nuts during that breeding period. And those tend to be very concentrated when they have a phenomenon called mast. So across this continuous eastern deciduous forest, only in certain regions would you have a tremendous nut crop. And that's what the birds used for their food. So as we cut down the forest and converted land for agriculture, those continuous forests also were broken up.
So it sounds like there were multiple factors that went into the extinction of the passenger pigeon. Is this extinction event unique, or are there other birds that have similar stories?
You know, we don't really think about it every day, but there are a number of North American birds that colonial and pioneer and, you know, earlier Americans experienced as part of the wilderness experience that indeed have gone extinct. And many of these were abundant birds in our native ecosystems. For example, well, we've spoken of the passenger pigeon, but did you know that just in our area in Washington, D.C., where we're sitting today, when we go in the forest now, we don't really think of encountering a tropical-looking parrot, but this is the Carolina parakeet that used to be, you know, in the eastern deciduous forest.
Beautiful.
This amazing bird was native to our forests and fields, and it became extinct. The heath hen that we have here,
this tall one,
last occurred on Martha's Vineyard, and it was a popular bird for hunting in the east here.
Again,
but it's also
a staple in a diet.
Another case. And here we have the ivory-billed woodpecker. There's debate about whether this woodpecker is finally extinct or not, but this was the largest woodpecker in our North American fauna, and apparently it is extinct.
And so for these birds to go extinct, is there ever just one reason, or is it a variety of impacts that causes them to go extinct?
You know, that to me is a really compelling question that as a scientist I want to address. It's one of the things that drives my research, because we know that a lot of global change is taking place in the world today, that there is a high rate of extinction, and that there are a high number of birds that are threatened with extinction. And so what I want to study is what really caused the extinctions that have led up to this of the past. What really does cause birds to finally go extinct? And usually, you're right, Maggie, there are a number of forces that could be causing that population decline. And the question for science is to figure out what are the most important ones, what are the most important actions that we need to take then to preserve species now.
So your research is very important. So we have a student question. Are you ready to take it?
Sure, let's take a question.
This one comes from Jeff from Jacksonville. He wants to know, why does it matter if we don't have any passenger pigeons?
One of the reasons it matters is that plants and animals have what we call ecological roles. And the ecological role could be what the bird eats and what ecosystem it lives in and how it interacts with other animals. And if you have an extinction that had been extremely abundant become extinct, then that very major ecological role is missing. And there's no real effective way to restore it. You can try, if you decide that the ecosystem is not functioning the way it used to because of this extinction, you could try to introduce into the ecosystem something with a similar ecological role, but consider the passenger pigeon. There was no other bird on Earth that was like the passenger pigeon. There's nothing we can introduce to restore that role. So that's one reason that losing species is harmful to our ability to keep ecosystems healthy going forward.
Great question, Jeff. Thank you. So, Helen, I know that you do a lot of your research in Hawaii. Why are the Hawaiian Islands a unique landscape for you to do your work?
The Hawaiian Islands are a volcanic archipelago, and they're out in the middle of the world's largest ocean, this incredible barrier to animal dispersal. For animals that live on continents, they have a very hard time arriving in Hawaii across all that salt water. And the islands are volcanic. They are, from their lava that is pushed up through the lithosphere, or the Earth's crust, and is poured out onto the surface of the crust. And finally, this mound of lava breaks the surface of the ocean, and it builds an island. And on the big island of Hawaii, those volcanoes stretch even 3 miles almost above the surface of the ocean. So they're this very rich ecosystem that is nevertheless separated from other terrestrial or ground ecosystems by a vast ocean barrier.
So how do you find fossils, if that's what you study, out in this volcanic landscape?
Paleontologists didn't turn their attention to looking for fossils in the Hawaiian Islands for a long time. In fact, it was in the 1970s that I started looking there with Storrs Olsen and some other important contributors in the Hawaiian Islands. And that was really because who would go look for fossils in volcanoes? What's going to preserve a fossil there? So the first thing we did is we went around